Ulrik, what a wonderful talk, and I'm sure everybody has many questions. So I'm just, and I know our students have a lot of questions, but I'm just going to tee this discussion off with a fundamental question, which is how applicable is constructive journalism to a democracy as young or as not fully mature as India, compared to other countries like Denmark, Australia, etc., where democracy is fairly well established. And so do you believe that constructive journalism can have as meaningful an impact in a country like India, where the ability of journalists to play that critical role to hold governments accountable and to make sure that democratic institutions are sustained, that fight is still very real and present?
Yeah, good question, which demands a nuanced answer. The fast one would be say, yes, I do believe it has a place also in a democracy such as India. Also, but let me say, I had some visitors from some country in Africa, and they were very interested and very engaged. But they also asked me almost the same question about their country, where their main problem was lack of freedom of speech, censorship. There were a lot of things they were not allowed to do. And of course, the first thing is, as a journalist, you have to figure out how to stay alive, how to not get into prison, how to not be shot, but climbing the value ladder, there are also things you could do there, and in some of these younger democracies. It's so easy to fall into the trap and make journalism part of the political battle. So journalism is not the place in which you can turn to and expect to get the best obtainable version of the truth. If you engage in the battle, in the political battle, and you decide that the president and the prime minister on the leader party is always, whatever they do is wrong. That's the way Fox News did with Democratic presidents when they started. Obama was terrible. No Democrats were any good watching Fox News, with the result that Donald Trump got elected, and with that result that CNN turned the other way, and no Republican has ever said anything which is not completely stupid if you watch CNN. And of course, there are more nuances to it than that. So even in a very mature democracy as United States, there are flip sides to this. But I do think that if you step back and say, why are we journalists? Why do we publish? Is that to make one party look great and another party look bad? Or is it actually to give people the best obtainable version of the truth in order for them to make up their own mind? In my opinion, that's the role of journalism. But it's so easy to forget it because there are a lot of forces, people behind publishing, which is sometimes political parties or big companies who have commercial reasons for doing what they want, or just our own journalistic culture. So if you guys teaching the next generation of journalism don't think, which I know you do, that journalism is so much more than a tool in the political battle, or so much more than a product to be sold, then we are not helping democracy. We might help part of the part, but don't be surprised if people don't trust us then.
I think we've obviously had a lot of these conversations, and clearly there's a need in India for a new brand of democracy. I think public trust in media is at an all-time low. perhaps even lower than public trust in public officials. But India also has a great opportunity because our average age is 26. And the youth of our country, they consume the news on Instagram, Snapchat, etc., where at least that's where they spend the most amount of time. And that medium lends itself, I think, to to more hopeful versions of reality. And I do think there's an opportunity, huge opportunity. Have you in your have you in your experience found ways to really tap into to the youth of countries, particularly in emerging democracies like India, where they really are the future? And so if you look at the West, the target audience for news is, maybe 45, 50 above, whereas in India, the big chunk of people are young and they're on social media. And what role can constructive journalism, the principles of constructive journalism, play in sort of moving the conversation forward?
When we do surveys about people, news avoidance, people turning their backs on traditional news, we can see that two groups that are really fed up with news full of conflict and drama and things that are so depressing. It is women and young people. And that leads to a lot of people saying young people, they're not interested in journalism, they're not interested in following news. And I think it's damn wrong. I think a lot of journalists, young people, they do want to understand the world. They do want to read stories that engages them. They just don't want to be scared. They don't want to be treated as cattle. They want it to be treated as they want to be part of a dialogue, not being someone who sits at one end of a monologue from some media companies that they don't trust or don't know. So I think we get it wrong, and we especially get it wrong if we think that young people are without our reach. We should concentrate on trying to serve the old part of the population. And what I've found, which is extremely encouraging, is talking to young journalists in newsrooms and young journalism students. I mean, when they get that this is also good journalism. This is also a way you can use your professional skills in order to improve society without you deciding what direction society should follow. But you are the facilitator of it. You inspire. You bring in new examples about hope and new ideas and new ways of doing it. If that can also be a role of journalists, that really appeals to the next generation of journalists. I see that all over the world, and that's encouraging.
Thank you, Ulrik, for that. And I'm sure we have lots of young people who've tuned in here, and I'm sure a lot of them have questions. We have one or two of our students who are in our newsroom in Bangalore who have some questions. So I'm going to ask one of our young faculty members, Pratik, to take the mic to some of those young people who have questions for you.
Sure.
Thank you, Timothy, sir. So it was a great talk. Thank you so much, Mr. Ulrik. We really liked how you spoke about hope and how a lot of us are really looking forward for this hope, so that we know that there's a role we as youngsters can play in making sure that we could turn around the things, and there's a lot of positivity around us. So I would quickly hand over the mic to one of the students here. Preetika.
Sure.
Hello, sir. My question is, since you were an investigative reporter before, what were the challenges you faced in the process of implementing the idea of constructive reporting?
First of all, that we journalists as a profession, we are very good at criticizing everybody else. We are not very, very fond of being criticized ourselves. So I've been basically trained to every time somebody criticized me or my profession, it was politicians or CEOs of big companies or unions or whatever, and they basically all said, "Why don't you tell nice stories about me instead of all the critical stories?" Why don't you paint a nice picture of me? And I have always stonewalled that. And I said, I mean, we are not here to give you free advertising. Run an ad. I just do my job. I'm not negative. I'm just a journalist. That's the difference. So I'm not very good at listening. But if I had listened and asking people on the street in Bangalore or in Denmark somewhere and asking the following questions, do you need more news? What do you think they will answer? We can also ask, do you need faster news in your life? What do you think they will answer? Yes, I really want faster news. No, they won't. So the first question they will say, no, but I do need better news. I don't need faster news, but I need stories I can trust and engages me. Right? So we know instantly that there's something wrong, but we're not really good at it. So when I started talking about this in my own newsroom, I think almost everybody thought that I had a brain tumor. And they all thought that I was against investigative journalism, that I just wanted to paint a nice picture of the world. So I have to spend a lot of time talking about what constructive journalism wasn't. Because we are instantly afraid of somebody criticizing. It's just because we want free advertising or avoid critical questions. No, that's not the case. It builds on top of it. So I spend a lot of times doing that. But I've found that some of the most critical people against this are actually very, very older investigative reporters who have built their careers of bringing somebody down, which is good. Somebody is doing that if they're really crooks. But it's such a big part of their identity that if somebody come and say, hey, there's also a flip side to what you're doing, it's not enough that you uncover a problem and then jump to a new problem and a new problem and a new problem, instead of sticking to it and say, okay, now I've documented this, and now I ask the question, what should be done about it? And if you don't have an idea as a decision maker on how to solve the problem, I have traveled to the Netherlands, or I have traveled to Thailand. They had the same problem 5 years ago, and here's how they solved it. Now I bring this to the table. Now you can't say it's not your fault, because that's not the question. The question is, what do you want to do about it? If you don't have an idea, what do you think about their idea? So it's a very, very critical question. Somebody else fixed it. You can't fix it. Why? See, there's nothing against it, but a very, very long, answer to your very good question. I think that has been the biggest obstacle, the biggest criticism, saying, are you against investigative critical reporting now? Shouldn't we control power? And the answer to that is yes, and we also have to inspire.
Thank you, Ulrik. And we'll go back to our newsroom in Bangalore, but we'll also, throw it open to people who we have Francesca Folda. She is the Global Communications Director for Amani Institute, and she's joining us from beautiful Lake Como in Italy. Francesca, you have a question.
Francesca.
Hi. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having me here. This session is super interesting. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to join. And I have a question myself. I was an investigative journalist too, and so I grew up with the same learnings. And I had the same level of disappointment, so that's why I also changed my career a bit. But I still believe there are some elements in the DNA of what was investigative journalism that are still true in constructive journalism. So I would like to hear from you, what do you think is this common root, the common DNA, what we need to preserve from the past journalistic mode that is still today and that is still effective and it's still worth in the constructive journalism era, that I totally agree with you is more than needed.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of the principles of old school journalism that we have to remind ourselves of. Fairness, for one, being balanced, If somebody is being accused, give them a chance to reply. Be open-minded, be curious, be real curious. I mean, nothing better as a journalist going out there and really want to know, because I'm curious, why do you think the way you do? Or why is the world like this? And the truth is, a lot of the pace in journalism is contradicting that. Any of you working with TV or have seen that? I mean, the truth of the matter, if you work as a news journalist, either you try to beat the ambulance to get to the accident before them, or you have to have written your manuscript before you leave the newsroom, because otherwise you will get late for the news show. So I want to say this as a lead, then I want to interview somebody who says this, and then I need somebody to say that, and then I end an end clip. So you just look for something that you have already researched. You haven't researched. You have just imagined things, because that would be a good story. It's not a lie, but it's not really necessarily the way the world is, but you're just confirming your thing. And that's a way we're working, not because we're evil or because we're stupid, but because we are busy. And we might be too busy here. So we have to, it's not because all the old values are wrong. We know exactly what good journalism is, but maybe in our quest for clicks and likes and speed, we need to be reminded, and also have new tools and new ways of doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, and thank you, Ulrik, for that. Pratik, back to you in our newsroom in Bangalore. Let's hear from a couple of more students.
Yeah, thank you so much. Before that, I have a question myself. So, Mr. Ulrik, you did speak about how it's really important to have a well-documented problem to get to the solutions. So, the entire picture, which has both these kinds of journalism, on one hand we have the conventional journalism, and on the other we do have constructive journalism. Doesn't this all lead to a fact that we need both of these to work hand in hand as complementing each other rather than two different alternatives? Wouldn't that make the entire concept way more clearer?
Yeah, and I fully agree. That's why also I showed you the table with the three principles, or the breaking, the investigative, and the constructive. And constructive news is not an alternative to the first two. And it really doesn't make sense to be constructive about something you don't know exists, or you didn't know there was a problem. You have to document first there's a problem to be constructive about. Otherwise, it's just nice. And nice journalism, nice stories about cats being saved from tall trees, it could be nice as entertainment, but it's not really journalism, right? It's just helping people killing time. And if we are in that business, a lot of other websites are much better than helping people killing time. I tell you that.
Yes, thank you so much. So we'll quickly move to the next question from one of our students, Udbhavi.
Hello, sir. My name is Udbhavi Balakrishna. I'm a student from National School of Journalism. My question was partly answered, but I would like to have some more clarity about it. So you said that constructive journalism focuses on the now, what, and how. But there's already this perception of journalists to be very critical. Instead of using critical thought as a tool, there is this perception that we have to be critical in everything that we in what we're looking for in order to report. So my question is, what must we do to bring about this shift in perspective and this shift in perception, since that's already ingrained in the minds of public?
Coming back to what we talked about just before, I think the most important tool for any journalist is real curiosity. I mean, really go out and see, I really want to know. And in order really to know, you need to ask, and you need to go on asking until you get a decent answer. So, for instance, if there was a company in Bangalore producing clothes, and they have polluted the rivers, and they have been mistreating their workers, and you have been uncovering that, And suddenly you get a call in the newsroom from the CEO of the company saying, now we have stopped. We've actually implemented some things that now we are doing that. Then if you go out, and you shouldn't just report that and say, okay, now the CEO say everything is fine. You should go out and you should really be critical and say, can we see? Can I talk to the workers? Can I see the report? What does the authorities say? How's the water in the river? But if you then find out it's actually true, news is something out of the ordinary. And if the ordinary is they pollute and they are assholes, and suddenly they have stopped, they have actually made a change, then that's news. Before I would have said that's not a story because I don't want to give him free airtime. I don't want to give him an advertisement for how great he is. But if that's actually important for people to understand what's going on, shouldn't I, as a journalist, do that story as well? If I have been critical, if I have asked my critical questions, I think, yes, you should uncover the problem, but you should also be open-minded to see, is there a way out? Have anything changed? And if you can document it, report it also, please. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that I think that's a great answer. There's an interesting question from a neuroscience perspective from one of our students, Ashutosh Patki. So Ashutosh, if you are here, if you can just turn on your camera and ask the question. Okay, so I'm not sure he can hear us. So I'm just going to ask his question anyway. Ashutosh asks that to his understanding, constructive journalism is solution-based journalism that highlights a positive side, emphasizing that aspect. But neuroscience suggests that human brains are more sensitive to negative news. So what about the are we just more programmed to be drawn to fighting?
Can I add the critical question to that statement is, are you sure? But I think the middle long answer to that is I'm sure there's some truth to it. And neuroscientists that I've spoken to and psychologists tells me that we have been primed from the Stone Age to be aware of any danger. When we were on the savannah and there was a little rustle in the grass, we turn our head because it might be a sable tiger that will jump out and eat our child, right? So we constantly went. We have been using that in news, tapping people on the shoulder all the time, say, watch here, it might be dangerous here. There's a fallen tree in Indonesia, watch here. So I think that's true. Fear is a very, very, very big driver, and we are genetically disposed for that. But the nuanced answer is that psychologists and neuroscientists say there's one thing that is even more forceful in the human brain. That's hope. The idea that tomorrow must be better than yesterday. That idea is actually what gets us out of bed every day, right? So if we can not only talk into the fear of people, but also talk into the hope of people, the opportunities, the ways out, the inspirational, then we also tap in something very, very forceful in people's minds. People long to feel hopeful again. Not false hope, but real hope, well-documented hope. So if you have documented a problem in Bangalore, how did they do it in Delhi that you can learn? If we have stories in Denmark, concrete example, 18% of young Danes now smoke, which might not for you be a high number, but government after government for the last 20 years has said, we want the first generation that doesn't smoke. So it's a complete failure. So we can now focus all our journalistic energy on which minister should be fired because he was a failure, right? We could do that. And we could also thinking, has anyone had the same ambition in Europe and succeeded? And suddenly we realize, we look at neighboring country Norway, where the number is less than 1% of young Norwegians smoke. What the hell did they do? So we go up there, we do a story, they succeeded. What was their strategy and what can we learn? That changed the complete conversation about smoking in Denmark because they had ideas. They were doubling the price of cigarettes, banning that they could sell it in supermarkets, creating commercial, making it not very cool to smoke if you were a young Norwegian, all that stuff. They had a strategy. Not that we should promote that and say that's the only way we could do it, but just saying they could do it. Why can't we? And if we don't like that idea, what other strategy do you have? That changes the national conversation, see?
Thank you, Ulrik. We also have Deepthi Kumar, who is the Director of Communications for the United States State Department and the Consulate in India. And she has a question for you, Ulrik.
Thanks, Timothy. And this has been such an interesting evening of discourse. So nice to meet you, Ulrik. So my question is more on the local context of what you're saying and how it applies here in India. So in the hopefulness towards building our constructive journalism here in India, what infrastructure would a journalist in these times need to make it work, taking into consideration that the government is clamping down with very strict, stringent regulations on digital media outlets and traditional news outlets? We also are plagued by domestic violence against journalists, against reporters. So how do we make it work? It's great to know the tools, but how do we put it into action?
First of all, I mean, constructive journalism is not the answer to everything. And if your question is, your question really is, how does it work in a local environment? How do you use it in local coverage? I think local journalism is the place where it's easiest to do. It really makes sense. I mean, one example, a local newspaper going down the drain, they did a pilot in a little town, and they said, now we want to play a different role. They moved their base. They were now not in an office somewhere in the outskirts of the city. They moved in, and then they said, okay, today we report from the high school, and we give the right to serve to the high school students. So what do you think is important? And then the high school students started that, and they had a dialogue about that. So in the next 2 weeks, they went to the biggest company in that city and talked to the workers, and what did they care about, and what could they use the journalistic tools to do. So they changed a lot of things, and they uncovered problems, but they also asked their readers, do you have any ideas on how to solve this, and what do you think? And they were really taking them serious. And they were really, they became the facilitator of the public debate on how to improve that city. Another regional TV station we're working with, they changed their whole mindset. Their mindset before their slogan, I think they even put it on their trucks, saying, we help people on our island to kill time or something. It was not really that, but they had no ambition, right? Now on all their trucks, it says, together, we want to improve life on our island. That's what we want to do. Meaning, when we come with our truck, a reporting ENG van, it is because we want to talk about life. We want to uncover if something's wrong. We want to listen to your concerns, but we will also want to find ways that life can be improved. And we want to spend our resources listening to your ideas. We want to facilitate a public debate about ideas. So politics is not only about a blame, but it's about ideas. We want to spend our resources going to other cities, other islands. How have they solved it? Bring that into our island. So they completely swapped the mindset. And what happened was that the level of trust in that news organization went up through the roof. And people spend more time on it, and they shared stories much more. And actually also subscriptions went up.
Thank you,
So it can be
Ulrik.
done.
Thank you. And one person who's actually trying to do something about this in India is Anuradha Kedia, who is the founder of the Better India, which is perhaps India's most ambitious and successful effort at constructive journalism.
Wow.
And so Anuradha is here, and she has a question for you.
Thank you, Timothy, for inviting me for this really engaging session. And I so very resonated with this. So thank you, Ulrik, for speaking what we've, articulating so well what we've been doing for the past 12 years.
Wow.
So I'm the co-founder of the Better India. We reach out to over 100 million people every month with our stories around solutions-oriented and constructive journalism. We talk about citizen initiatives. We talk about individuals making a change. And we look at it from an objective solutions approach. So my question to you, Ulrik, is something that's kind of close to my heart, because we have very consciously stayed away from, two discourses, political and religious, because those are two topics we believe are extremely polarizing, and they are very capable of hijacking the entire narrative around constructive journalism. Unfortunately, in spite of all of these efforts, sometimes you do get tagged into one or the other camp, and you do tend to ruffle feathers, and you do sometimes get painted as a pro-government, media organization. That is something. How do you really avoid falling into that trap? How do you make sure that you do not get pulled into any such narrative while you're reporting?
Make sure that when you report it, that you distinguish between what are facts and what is just an opinion. Try to be fair and balanced. Use the journalistic tools. I understand that it's difficult to cover religion because by definition it's about faith, but politics is not only about faith. It's also about facts. It's also about, this is the way it looks. Which idea do you have? Which idea do you have? And sometimes we see ourselves as also trying to help bridge build in the gap between politicians and between politicians and journalists. We did something very crazy. We invited newly elected politicians to the Danish parliament to a democratic boot camp for 24 hours. And we basically gave them the training nobody else gave them on what is the job of a politician. How are you a leader? How do you avoid being part of the conflict culture that destroys Danish politics? How do you deal with media? Not giving them media training, but giving them the ideas of training. How do you avoid falling into the traps of just being too fast, too loud, too rude in order to get attention? Where do you get facts? All these things, nobody in parliament would give them that. So we did that, and we're now being asked to do it again. We'll now do it again with some regional elections. So I think there are things we can do. I don't know if you have, it might be off the point, but I just had a workshop with a Japanese company, media company, and they like yours, looked at things that work in Japan and around the world. And their problem was that people didn't really trust them. They had a little fan base, but they were not really growing. And so I was basically telling them the opposite that I have told now, because most newsrooms, we spend too much on the problem and too little on the potential solution. And that they spent too little time on documenting what was wrong. And then they had the risk of being perceived, and perception is reality, as just a publication for nice thoughts, nice ideas, nice, but nothing that was really important. I don't know if you ever experienced that problem, but but the more I look into this, I think in order to gain the credibility and the legitimacy in society, you need to really document what is wrong and get the nuances of that before you start trying to solve it. Try to inspire to, otherwise people don't get it. They don't find it relevant. I don't know if you can use that to anything. You probably have solved it because you've worked with it so long.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting to hear. I definitely have a lot of follow-on questions, but I don't want to take up the entire time here. So I'll look forward to connecting with you outside of this.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Ulrik, I mean, just to, go back to your response, in India, religion and politics are pretty much the same. They're intertwined. So I think that's why it's a position. But to Anuradha's point, one way I can think creatively of sort of overcoming the perception is we often in India we're just sort of looking at politics from a central level or a federal level, right? I think it's important also to look at it from a state level, because if you look at it at a state level, then you have different parties in power in different states, and so then you can sort of in some ways by producing solutions, constructive journalism stories, you can bat away that perception that because if it's a central government, then it's one party, then so whatever you do, you'll tend to be painted with a broad brush. So.
Right.
Okay, we are running out of time. I mean, but we have, I think, lots and lots of questions. So I'm going to ask, okay, the coordinator of these talks, Professor Kannan, has a question. So, I think, we'll absolutely need to take that. And after that, if you can just, whoever wants questions, just if you can just put it down in the chat. And I know a lot of our students have questions, and we'll figure out a way to have Ulrik answer them. And we're working on together with the Constructive Institute to see how we can work closer and do things together in India. So this is going to be the first of many conversations, I'm sure. So Vinisha, and then whoever has any other really important questions, we can put it in the chat, and if we can spend a minute or two to go through them, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. It's also because I speak too much, so I'll say just yes or no from now on.
So first of all, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. Okay, my question is, we all have our own biases, right? And we always look for confirmation which proves our biases are true, right? And we have these big giant companies like Google and Facebook who use all these optimization tools to personalize who should receive what information. Now, don't you think under such a situation, right, when there is an abundant source of information, especially on the digital platform, don't you think that's a huge competition for the hopeful, the news for like hopeful news, especially on the digital platform, and how to overcome this?
Yes. but if I should elaborate just a little, I mean, we now all see the flip side of the coin of digitalization. We all 20 years ago just imagine, fantastic, democratic tool, we could connect each other. Google, Facebook were fantastic, and now even Google and Facebook can see that there are flip sides to how big and how they have changed the democratic conversation. I'm in close contact with both companies, and if you go to our website, you can see a conversation I had at our 24 hours for the future of journalism conference we had in December, and talking with those two about the way they curate content and their responsibility on that. In essence, I mean, they understand, both for the reason of image and because they can see that it's a problem, that their algorithms and they spread hate speech and they spread misinformation, and that's a bad thing. I personally, very naive, think they try to change it. What I try to do now is to say, I'm now working to find an algorithm for constructive journalism. because their problem is, if I tell them, you have to help people find constructive stories, these stories about hope, nuanced, inspirational, engaging stories, which I call constructive, you have to help people find them. Otherwise, they drown in the polluted sea of all kind of garbage information. And they say, yes, but how do we define it? How do we define quality journalism? And they have tried to say, okay, everything from New York Times is quality. And then 40% of the Americans say, are you crazy? It's not. So it's a sea full of minds sailing into that for them. So that's why I say, now we want to create an algorithm with objective criteria. So and we are now pretty far now. So they are very interested in implementing that in order so their machine learning programs, the algorithm, can find these stories and push them up in search and push them up in news tab at Facebook. Because if they can do that, people find it, and then there's another commercial reason for news publishers to publish these kind of stories. And we're also working with the biggest marketing company in the world in order to find ways in which they can move some advertising money from tech giants back to quality journalism. But it only works if it's quality. And how can they define quality? And this is the way of doing so. Very long answer again, sorry.
Yeah, but that's promising. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer. We just have one last question, and then we can wrap up. And I think you have touched upon a lot of these things, but maybe it's a good way to summarize this evening's discussion, which is at a time when, and Vikas from NSOJ asked, at a time when negative and tragic news is a major part of reality in some parts of the world, how do you manage to strike the right balance between constructive journalism and criticism? I guess the question is, while constructive journalism and traditional journalism need to complement each other, can the same platform do both?
Yes, I think the worst thing you could do is say, now we make a magazine only for good news, or we make a program on TV only with nice stuff. I think what is important is that you just, we know about that. We know we constantly in our news bulletins or our newspapers try to balance. So we don't only have stories in our national paper from one part of the country, but we try to have from different part of the country. We don't want to only have men on the front page, but also sometimes even have a woman. And we want to be diverse, and we want to give a fair and accurate picture of the world. It also deals with this kind of, if we only do dramatic stories, only do things that doesn't work, everything that is hopeless, if we do that all the time, despite the fact you can say, yeah, but it's true, it happened, yeah, you're fine. But if it's everywhere, so this offers a way of looking at it and say, we can find a different balance. And in the newsroom, we can say, where's the constructive angle to it? So it changes, it's a vocabulary, it changes the conversation. One example, when I worked at DR, when I thought, yes, now they are getting it. I've been talking about this for a long time. And then we had a story, there was a National Statistical Office talking about that 40% of all Danes wanted a new job. So we were about to do the routine story about that, about bad bosses, about bad work environment, and we could do it before we even ran out of the newsroom to get pictures on it. Until there was a young intern saying, hey, does that mean that 60% of Danes cannot think about getting another job? They think they have a dream job. What is the best story? And we said, oh, maybe she's right. News is something out of the ordinary. We had all these stories about bad bosses and people hated going to work. And it turns out that 60% of the population couldn't imagine getting a new job. That was the story. And then, of course, also telling people that 40% people, they actually are looking for a new job. But still, it's a way of seeing things. So that's why this is not only about tools, it's about ambition. It's about the meaning of journalism, and it's about mindset. And now I shut up. Sorry.
No, I mean, on the contrary, there are so many questions still coming in. Ulrik,
we can take 5 minutes more. I don't care.
Take 5 minutes more. Okay.
Yeah.
Anika, Pratik, and then we'll wrap up.
Good evening, sir. My question to you is, as journalists, we value objectivity and we try to be unbiased. So my question relates to reporting social issues and issues surrounding the justice system. So if we're reporting the problem while also being invested in finding the solution, won't that hinder our judgment and force us to pick sides?
Yeah, but let me stress that our job is not to find, as you put it, the solution. I mean, that's not our job. We can inspire to it. We can say, we had this problem in this town, in that town, they did something else. That was another strategy, another approach. What can we learn from that? That's not promoting it. That's asking a question. That's putting it on the agenda. The moment you say, we need to do exactly the same thing as they did in Bangladesh, you have left journalism. You have become a politician or an activist. And that's fine if you call yourself an activist or a politician, but please don't call yourself a journalist, meaning a journalist who tries to give people the best obtainable version of the truth, who are really curious, who want to be fair and balanced, who ask open questions in order to get real answers to the question. So don't fall into the trap and think that your job is to be the judge on which is the best solution for any problem, because maybe you are, but I'm not smart enough, and I'm certainly not elected to do that as a journalist.
Pratik, very quickly, and then we wrap.
Yes, just the last question from the newsroom. So I wanted to ask, in this pursuit of reporting on success stories, we often try and celebrate the person responsible for the transformation. So don't you think we need to stay focused on the process of the constructive journalism rather than ending up celebrating the person responsible for the change?
I think you need to rephrase the question, because I'm so stupid I didn't understand it.
All right. So often what happens is, when we try and report on success-based stories, we end up celebrating the person responsible for that transformation. So don't you think, since we are journalists, we need to stick to the process, or is it fine to celebrate the person responsible for the change?
Yeah, I mean, it can be too easy to say, here is a person who has come up with an idea and been successful, and then we do the hero story. I mean, the interesting thing could also, in the storytelling, could be the process in order to get there. What was the obstacle? Where was it difficult? What can other people learn from that? What would you have done differently? Why were you successful? When did you change your mind? How did you persuade people to do that? All these questions are really interesting. So I mean, it's very easy to do the crook story or the hero story, right? And maybe we should go beyond that. So if I understand your question correct, I agree.
Yes.
So
yes.
the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. That's all from the newsroom for tonight. It was a great
Thank you
session.
for joining.
Thank you once again, Ulrik.
Okay, just very quickly, let me just add on behalf of the whole team, I think there's a huge effort that has gone on behind the scenes to, bringing this together. So appreciation to the team that worked. There's a team of students and team of faculty who put this together. Ulrik, I cannot thank you enough for your time and also your generosity with your thoughts to share. And we have so many questions that we are going to figure out ways to do this more often. And we hope once the pandemic is over that we'll be able to do this in person in India.
I would love that.
Well.
Can I say one thing about, now I've been talking to Timo quite a few times, and I've been watching your website, listening to your questions. I mean, there are a lot of journalism centers around the world. Not a lot of journalism centers that not only talk about, but practice the idea of journalism that producing important professionals for the future that should make society better in order to uncover the problems of it, but also help people understand it better and bridge build and look for potential ways of improving the livelihood of people. I mean, that whole idea of journalism, not a lot of journalism centers understand that task and is able to practice it. So I'm very proud that to get to know you and be involved a little with what you guys are doing. So thanks for that.
No,
and
excellent.
Go out and do good.
Yes, and together, let's work towards a better future, a better democracy in India, and for a better world. So thank you very much, and have a great evening. And I'm going to ask you to just unmute yourselves, switch on the mic in the newsroom, and let's give Ulrik a big round of applause. Thank you, and we'll be talking soon. Thank you. Have a great evening. Bye-bye, everybody.